Welcome to the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The Indiana Basketball Weekly Show is brought to you by BetNow.eu. Make sure you use the promo code TRUTH100. I am your host for the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in. It's all Kent Sterling all the time. Kent Sterling, how you doing, Kent?
It's what we do. I could not be better, Mike. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine, and now the Indiana Hoosiers are 4-0. But when I look at the KenPom, they have the 9th worst schedule in the country. And I don't think that that's a very good schedule. That's out of 300. They're 345th out of 352 teams.
But you know what? I dig it because they needed it. They're getting better. They're using it correctly. And if they had scheduled like Purdue is scheduled because of the Gavitt games, they had both Texas and then Marquette. Indiana would have lost both those games. But I think that because of what they've done the first 4 games and what they'll do the next 3 before they start playing teams like Florida State, Notre Dame, and Minnesota, and Nebraska, and Arkansas, the teams you've got in December, they're going to be good enough in December to be able to compete with those teams, I think, successfully. So usually I am not a fan of cupcakes. I don't like this. It seems like it's predatory against season ticket holders to show them that level of direct basketball. But I think it's really going to help Indiana this year be a better team in December and then beyond.
But my question is this. There's only 3 games left in the month, and then you get into that December slate, and Devontae Green played 20 minutes this last game, but Rob Phinisee sat out. So what is concern there on getting any kind of chemistry with this team going when your backcourt hasn't even played together yet?
That's a great question. And I don't know exactly what's going on in the state of Indiana, but Indiana football, Indiana basketball, Colts, Pacers, Purdue football, Butler basketball, all a bunch of injuries for those different programs. And I don't know what's going on in this state, but it seems to be like the ratio of healthy to injured is crazy in the state of Indiana compared to other places. But I thought Green looked pretty good except for his shot. I mean, he moved well. I thought the team communicated well. And once you get all those guys together, I don't think it's going to be long before like Rob Phinisee and Devontae Green can play well together because they've played quite a bit together. But guys like Armaan Franklin, I think that Franklin's going to be a lot better. Trace Jackson Davis, too, going to be a lot better when we get to December and January because they've gotten a whole ton of minutes during this month of November.
All right. They could have at least played like a Missouri State or something. I mean, because I watched Missouri State play against Xavier. Missouri State's pretty good. Actually, I can see why they're favored to win Evansville's conference. And I just call it Evansville's conference because they beat Kentucky. And I wanted to bring that up again because I coached quarterbacks privately, and I got a lot of them from Kentucky. And they all showed up with their Kentucky sweatshirts on yesterday. So
is that right?
I got to ask them what they thought of the Evansville game just for fun. But I can't tell you the replies I got. But Indiana on Saturday night ran the record to 4-0 with a tight, hard-fought 100-62 win over Troy. I think Indiana plays DeVry International next. If you don't get the joke, you didn't listen to last week's show. But let's just break it down here. I think so far Indiana's three-point shooting looks improved. It's only been 4 games. They hit 9 out of 21 in this game and are currently shooting 36.2% from distance this season. Al Durham is off to a hot start from the perimeter, and he's knocked down 9 of his 17 attempts. So when we look at this, what do you take away from that?
Well, I love the way they're shooting free throws as well. I mean, they've hit almost 75%. They're in the upper third of Division I teams, and that's a huge improvement over last year. So they're doing the right stuff, and they're doing it, again, against doormat-style competition. But at least they're doing it right. And I don't think that this was a team the last 2 years, even when they played bad teams, that executed very well. And this seems like a better team that's responding to Archie Miller and his level of instruction in a better way. I'd like to see Deron Davis playing a little bit better, but that he isn't, that's kind of okay because Trace Jackson Davis every single game is making what, in my mind, appear to be huge strides in getting more comfortable with the college game. And I dig that. And they're going to need him. They're going to need Brunk to step it up. Brunk worries me because he looks to be a guy who, when he catches on the block, is not capable of scoring the basketball against quality bigs. And if you can't do that, if you can't force guys to double down on the block, you're not going to have a bunch of open looks on the exterior. And I think Indiana's good enough this year to hit open outside shots.
Yeah, and what I did is I went back and I looked at last year, the first 4 games. 3-point percentage-wise, they were 33%, 29%, 45%, and 40%. And the thing that is weird about that is Chicago State and Montana State were the games where they shot in the high 20s, low 30s. Marquette and Arkansas are where they shot in the 40s. But the thing that I like about this is last year it seemed like most of their three-pointers that they were hitting were shots that were almost kind of created, where now it's more of a ball movement thing, which makes me feel a heck of a lot better about this.
And that is what it looks like. The offense is successful consciously, and even late last year when Devontae Green got hot in games and kind of carried Indiana offensively, those points, especially late in the game, those were just created because he was going bombs away from 28 feet. And this year, it seems like there's kind of a coherent offensive structure. You know who they are. I thought this past game, again, it was against Troy, so who the hell knows. But I thought they communicated better on the defensive end. And I thought they started the game with some focus, and that was unusual for them given the way they started the previous 3 games. And I think that's critical. Like, they got to figure out a way to come out from the tip and be keyed in and know what they're doing and doing it at a high level. Or if you get, and we saw this last year too, and the year before, you get off to a 14-2 deficit, you get off to that kind of start, you're not going to be able to make it up. Or if you do make it up, you're going to exhaust yourself and you're going to lose the game anyway. Indiana, this past game, they got hot from the opening tip, and I think that is a really good sign. But this is the most coagulated I think I've seen Indiana play under Archie Miller.
I thought you went to IU. You just used coagulated in a sentence. I went to Indiana State, so I know what the word is, but I don't know if you use it in a proper sentence.
You know what? I studied vocabulary on the outside.
All right. How about this? Also, when I look back, the thing that makes me think this team is a lot better shooting team is you look at last year, even when they were shooting the ball well from 3, you look at the first 4 games, free throw percentage 57, 52. Now, they did have a 73, but you had a 66. And I think that it's no coincidence that if you have a team that's shooting 70% above, 70% or above from the free throw line, that you've probably got some shooters in this group, which I think makes me feel a lot better. That combined with the ball movement tells me that this team's going to be able to score points. I don't think we're going to see a game against Purdue that ends 47-44 or whatever it was.
Last year they hit 65.5%, which ranked 328th. And then this year they're hitting 74.6%, which ranks 75th. And like we talked about last week, free throw shooting is not opponent dependent, right? Whether you're playing Troy or whether you're playing Kentucky. And God bless Kentucky for losing that game against Evansville. I don't think we can talk about it enough. But regardless of who the opponent is, you're likely to be in the same ballpark. You're going to shoot similarly. There's nothing an opponent can do to make you a worse foul shooting team or a better one. So I think after 4 games, you look at this and you say, okay, Trace Jackson Davis, who hit 14 of 15 a couple of games ago, that kid can shoot foul shots. This is Brunk is not terrible shooting foul shots. Deron Davis is pitiful at it, but Deron Davis isn't getting a lot of run. They've got depth, so they don't have to have guys on the floor who can't shoot foul shots. And that's a boon to Indiana's potential level of success. I was really surprised Indiana didn't get any votes for the top 25. I don't think winning these 4 games necessarily shows you're an undefeated team and you're going to be able to beat the best and the brightest in the country. But I would have thought that anybody who watched the game against Troy or has really caught any portion of an Indiana game would say, you know what, maybe they are the 22nd best team in the country, and not even a vote for Indiana at this point.
Yeah, but it's been a while since Indiana's done enough to be recognized, and
True.
So people are just kind of waiting for that. And the other thing about the free throw percentage is this. I think that a bad free throw shooting team, usually your top guys start missing, everybody else misses. So I think that when you got a team, whether it's a Steve Alford or a guy like that that could really shoot free throws, then I think that that kind of feeds over too, just like misses can be kind of contagious. I think making the shots can be also.
Shooting is such a mental deal, and it's similar to hitting a baseball, right? If you got a team and they're squaring everything up and barreling up the ball, you're more likely to do it. You see it, you repeat it, and that's so true about shooting. When everybody shoots well, or a guy shoots great, that bucket just kind of expands a little bit to the point where everybody thinks that they can throw it in, and it's such a mental game and such a mental activity. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think shooting free throws is a lot. And if you're a Colts fan, kind of compare it to Adam Vinatieri, where he's great at it, but then all of a sudden he misses a couple and he starts to doubt himself. And if I'm in a game and my three teammates just had 2-1-1 or 3-1-1s and missed the front end of all of them, I'm going to probably think about that a little bit, at least before I get the ball handed to me.
Yeah, and with Vinatieri, it has been kind of a mental thing, although yesterday he made all of his kicks, which was a really good thing because that first one, like the crowd went silent and he knocked the extra point through and everybody kind of, they exhaled and then they cheered. And I think if he hits his first one, he's got a really good opportunity to hit a bunch of them. I don't know whether then we don't want to talk about the Colts all day. But that plant leg, that knee, I think, has given him some problems, and that might be one of the reasons that Vinatieri hasn't been necessarily on his game. But that's what happens when you get older. Stuff starts to break down. You start to ache where you didn't before. You don't recover at the same pace. And so you wind up dealing with dings and sprains and stuff and pain that you wouldn't normally.
Yeah, and another thing I think is big for Coach Miller because he stated before that he needs this team to be at 12 turnovers or less per game. The Hoosiers have hit that goal in 3 out of 4 games. On Saturday, they turned the ball over 12 times for a turnover percentage of 15.6. Through 4 games, the Hoosiers ranked 42nd in the nation at 15.7. Last season, Indiana had a turnover percentage of almost 18%, which was 133rd nationally. And when you put this together, I mean, it's like any other sport. Whoever makes the least amount of mistakes wins. So if you're shooting free throws and you're not turning the ball over, you've got a much exponentially better chance to win the game.
Well, and that's critical because Indiana's not that talented. There aren't a lot of 5-star kids on this team. And because there aren't a lot of 5-star kids, you're not going to be able to overwhelm teams with your level of talent. You've got to overwhelm them with your level of execution. And Indiana hasn't done that the last 3 years, and that's why they haven't gone to the NCAA tournament. I think this year can be a little bit different. I think that we can see that level of toughness sort of develop with these guys where there are more guys in the stands. But even at that, and I love the way Indiana played Saturday night. Like I said, best I've seen them look. But watching that game between Villanova and Ohio State last Wednesday night, holy hell, does Ohio State lock in, get in the stance, and make you work for every open look? They are really, really good. And if I were Archie Miller, instead of showing guys tape of us playing against Troy or whomever, I would show them the tape of Ohio State and say, this is where we got to get if we want to contend for a conference championship, and that needs to be the goal of this team every year.
Yeah, because the other thing I think, outside of Ohio State, Michigan State, maybe one or two others, I don't think the Big Ten is really strong this year.
No, it's not. And you can see it when you watch Nebraska play. You can see it. I mean, hell's bells. Who beat Northwestern? I mean, it's it's like Merrimack. For God's sake, a D2 team. The bottom of the conference can be had. I saw Butler beat Minnesota. Minnesota, at least at this point, is not playing great basketball. So like you said, there's that upper tier. There's the bottom tier of 3 or 4 teams. And then Indiana is kind of in that middle of that middle tier. And those are the teams you've got to beat. You got to wind up. Indiana needs to be 4th or 5th in the conference, I think, to be able to get in the NCAA tournament because of this weak-ass non-conference schedule that they're playing until we get to December. Again, not being critical of the non-conference schedule and the weakness of these 7 opponents, I actually like it a lot because I think it'll serve this team well when we get to the big games, but it's not going to help them with the NCAA selection committee.
Yeah, my only concern is they could have played slightly less horrific competition and won easily, but maybe not had to, I don't
get
know.
you. You know what? You're right. If you played the 245th easiest schedule, that'd be better for you in the long run, maybe, than the 345th. But who knows? When you start making the schedule, I mean, who knows enough about Troy to say that they're going to be, a Ken Pom ranked. What are these people anyway? 297?
I think I know enough about Troy basketball to know they're probably not going to be ranked really high. And I think everybody that Indiana played, I think you could be probably pretty safe thinking that.
Yeah, nobody's in the top 270 in Ken Pom. So that's been a problem. In Princeton, they're 223, so you're taking a slightly northward.
And they might be overrated, but we'll get to them in a minute. Another one that really stands out to me is Trace Jackson Davis.
Yeah.
The freshman forward recorded his second double-double in 4 games, 17 points, 14 rebounds. And through 4 games, he looks like one of the best newcomers in the country, Kent.
He looks really good, and he looks more comfortable every single game. He was named the co-freshman of the week this week, along with Malik Hall from Michigan State. But Trace just looks – in the first game that they played, I thought, boy, he doesn't look comfortable. And I got worried. When they played against Western Illinois, he just wasn't moving real well and didn't look sure of himself. But with every game, he's gotten a little bit more sure of himself. And all of a sudden, he's putting up numbers, like you said, the 17 and 14, just committing 3 fouls and hitting 6 of 6 from the field and only 5 of 9 from the line. But that's okay. You know what? He looks like a kid who's evolving very, very quickly from being a great high school player into being a very competent college player.
All right. Stewart on Twitter, which you can direct messages at Grilling Truth, says, yes, the early schedule is weak. It picks up in December. We get it. There isn't one game we're going to play in November that will hurt us in March. Not one single game. I don't know.
Well, they won't hurt, but they won't help.
I think this. I mean, it's according to what the record is. If they're 20 and 14,
right,
then it hurts because you might have a team out of the ACC that's 20 and 14 that didn't play a schedule nearly as bad. So, I mean, I hate to disagree with Stewart since he took the time to message in, but I think it can hurt you. Last year, I mean, Indiana's schedule kind of helped it a little bit to get them at least close to the bubble. If they'd have played this schedule last year at the start of the year instead of the Marquette and the Arkansas, which they split the games, I don't even think people would have mentioned them.
And you only play one true road game until we get to the new year, until we get to 2020. Only the game against Wisconsin is on the road, and that's December 7th. All the other games are either home and then they've got 2 neutral games, one against UConn in the Jimmy V Classic, and then the game at Bankers Life Fieldhouse in the Crossroads Classic against Notre Dame. And you do kind of paint yourself into a corner a little bit where not only do you need to win these 7, you need to win them convincingly, and then you've got to back it up by having a really good December and hoping that you go 11-9 in the Big Ten and win a game in the Big Ten tournament. And if you do that, you've probably got enough quality wins to have a resume that's going to put you in. But the thing, these games, these 7 games, as you alluded, they replace 7 potential opponents that would have given you a boost to your resume had you been able to win those. So these aren't just about getting these 7 wins. They're about the wins that you may have gotten had you scheduled somebody a little bit tougher. So I wouldn't overestimate the level of indifference that the NCAA selection committee has toward games against weak-ass opponents. and think that automatically if you put up 21 wins, 7 of them against these terrible teams, you're automatically getting into the tournament. I don't think that necessarily is going to be the case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is just because this basketball program is not considered what it once was.
Right. They are not the marquee. They're not a blue blood. I mean, you can say what you want about Indiana, but they haven't won a national championship in over 32 years. They haven't been to a Final Four in 17 years. It's been and they have been to an Elite Eight since the Final Four. So, they have won 2 Big Ten championships. One, I think, was tainted because they had a really easy schedule back in 2015. But overall, you can hold an NCAA tournament without Indiana being in it, and the NCAA tournament's going to be just fine.
All right, we have a question from Jack in Newcastle who wants to know if we think that not just the coaching has hurt the Indiana Hoosiers basketball program, but Jack wants to know if we think that going to class basketball hurt because of the less emphasis on the importance of high school basketball and maybe not as good a quality of players coming out of the state of Indiana.
No, I mean, if you go back to 2005 through current day and you look at the quality of players that has come out of the state of Indiana, and some of them coming out of Newcastle, the quality of play in Indiana, I don't think has ever been better. You can go back all the way back you want in class basketball. First of all, high school basketball in Indiana is completely unchanged other than the month of March. Everything else is exactly as it's always been.
Oh, it's not, Ken.
Yes, it is.
The crowds aren't.
The crowds are terrific. Crowds are really, really good.
Oh, they are.
I think that's way overplayed. I at least up here, the crowds are really, really good. You go to a Hamilton Southeastern Lawrence North game, that gym, I don't know whether it's going to be packed, but it's going to be close.
How about this, though? This would be my point. I live in an area where there's not any gigantic schools. So you have smaller schools. So now maybe you're just getting the students and the parents and maybe the people that would go before that weren't really connected were connected just because of the town. So how about this? Maybe it hurts the small towns more than it hurts the bigger towns, because if you're a big school and you win the 5A, 6A, whatever the biggest championship is now, you are the state champion.
I get that. And I'll even, although I don't agree with it, I'll grant your point. Just to say that that has nothing to do with the quality of basketball.
I agree with that
state.
Completely. So I agree with you there.
The training in this state, the coaching in this state, and you see it because you can hop across to Ohio and look at coaching. But when I've gone up to Chicago to see my nephew play or to watch games up there, or you watch AAU games between teams from Indiana and teams from other states, and the level of coaching isn't even close. I mean, the Indiana guys are really coaching basketball, and the guys in the Adidas Gauntlet or the EYBL series, I don't know what they're – I see guys, honest to God, from other places like Texas or New England, they're on their cell phones. They're on their smartphones talking to people during games. They're not coaching. They're babysitters. They're not teaching the game. Guys in Indiana are. And that's why, if that wasn't the case, then I would say that maybe Tom Crean was right, and it really doesn't matter where you recruit from. You know, if you get a guy from Virginia or you get a guy from Massachusetts or New York, you know what? You're going to get the same level of player as you do from Indiana. But that's not the case. You win with Indiana kids. If you grab kids from all over the damn place and you're not Kentucky unless they play Evansville, or you're not Duke or North Carolina, you are not going to be able to win at the same level. And that's why we see Purdue get it done year after year after year. Matt Painter knows what to go get. He knows where to find it, and he knows it's in Indiana.
Yeah, and it's like Bob Knight. He may leave Indiana to get something he needs that he can't find in Indiana, but he was getting the best players in Indiana.
Right.
For the most part.
And he didn't go too far afield. There were a lot of Ohio kids, a lot of Illinois kids. Charlie Miller came from Florida. Jim Thomas came from Florida. But Jim Thomas's parents, I think, had taught at IU, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that was just laziness by Knight, where he didn't want to travel to recruit. But what they wound up with were guys who knew the game. And speaking of Bob Knight, I think he's one of the real big reasons that Indiana coaching at the high school level is what it is, because he was very generous with his knowledge. And the high school coaches in Indiana learned a hell of a lot from Bob Knight when he was the coach at Indiana, and they still practice a lot of those principles today.
Well, I'll tell you this. 1977, if Risley was on here, he'd be whining. But Aurora beat Lawrence Central. Risley was the star. Aurora was an undersized school with about 500-600 kids in it, and they upset Lawrence Central. The cool thing about that is the head coach of that team was Bill Slayback, who just recently passed away. I think he's in the Indiana High School Basketball Hall of Fame. He was a great player back in the 50s at Aurora, and then he was a great coach at North Dearborn, and then at Aurora, and then eventually South Dearborn after it consolidated. And the cool story there was Bob Knight was heavily recruiting Risley. When the game was over, though, and Slayback goes back to his hotel room, and that night they're going to play in the Elite Eight against Columbus East, and he gets a call from Bob Knight, and Bob Knight talks to him for like 20, 25 minutes about how great it was and about the game and all of that. And when you hear something like that, I mean, he was after Steve Risley. You know, he didn't have to call the guy from Aurora that beat them, but he did. And it just showed the respect that he had for the high school coaches in the area, because chances are, no matter how good a kid was in Aurora, they still weren't going to recruit him. Because Aurora that year had a kid by the name of Tim Johnson that ended up going to Middle Tennessee that I think could have started for IU a couple years later. The kid was really good. You can ask Risley about him in that game. I think he scored like 36 points. They were double and triple teaming him. He hits like a baseline buzzer shot to beat Lawrence Central. And he was a good enough player, but he didn't have to do that. But when you hear that he did something like it, you see that even for small schools, he had respect for the coaches in Indiana, which I think just something like that, you know, maybe Coach Slayback says something to a kid's coach in Indianapolis, and there's just that respect there. So when Bob Knight calls, you want to go there.
You need to, I don't know whether this is the right way to put this or not, but you need to fit to be able to coach in Indiana and at Indiana. And I'll tell you a story, and I heard this from a great source about Tom Crean. And this is why this is a really good example of why I don't think that Tom Crean fit in Indiana and at Indiana. So he would come up to Carmel High School periodically to look at guys in games. And when he did, he would ask the head coach there, who at the time was a guy named Scott Hetty, who's now the coach at Marian University. He would call and he would make Hetty reserve a parking spot for him, had to have somebody, a security guy, at the parking spot to walk him into the gym and sit with Crean the entire time he was at the game. So that's Tom Crean. Matt Painter would just drive up and the only reason that Scott Hetty knew that Painter was in the gym was that Painter called after, and this is when he was recruiting Ryan Klein, and he came to the sectional. He waited in line. He parked wherever he could, waited in line to buy a ticket for like 45 minutes, got in, maybe the first quarter was half over, went in, sat down, watched the game, and then called Hetty after the game and said, hey, I was at the game. Next time, could I get a ticket waiting for me at will call so I don't have to wait in line to buy the ticket? One of these guys fits in the state of Indiana, and the other guy didn't.
Well, the scary thing is, why didn't Matt Painter think about maybe reserving a ticket beforehand?
Yeah, but I think, how would that
I know,
be? You're
but it's
standing
great.
in line, and there's Painter waiting with you.
Yeah, it was great that he did that. And see, my story, just to get up to the class basketball again, was down here in southeastern Indiana, it's not what it used to be, because you used to go every night. I went to South Dearborn High School. Gym seated 4,000. There'd be at least 3,000 there, even for regular season games. The sectional was always packed. And, I mean, it was just something that the last time I went to a sectional game would have been 7-8 years ago. It's when Connorsville and Batesville, or Connorsville and Green, Connorsville, Batesville played. That was when Howard, who went to Butler, played for Connorsville, and Michael Mincer, who went to Indiana State, played for Batesville. And I took my kids, And they're wanting to know, why are we going to go watch them? And I'm like, well, you're going to see what it used to be like when I was in school. And we get there, and there's 5,000 people jammed in the gym that seats 4,500. Everybody's going nuts. And I think Connorsville, I can't remember if they won or lost, but it was a double overtime game. The Howard kid was unbelievable in high school, too. He was in college, too.
Right.
But as soon as that game's over, the next game is like South Dearborn against Franklin County. South Dearborn's the home school. By the time it gets to tip-off for the South Dearborn game, there's maybe 600-700 people in the gym.
Right. And that's because the Howard family left.
Yeah.
You know, it was Section B at the Spartan Bowl in Connorsville was all Howards all the time. The family's enormous, and all the nephews and nieces would go to everything. He's a beautiful kid. And Matt's one of those things. That's a good Indiana corollary, too, is that Mike Davis, I don't believe, ever contacted Matt Howard in any way, shape, or form. And then Kelvin Sampson came and got on Howard a little bit late, but way too late. And Painter, and especially Brad Stevens, when Brad was the assistant for Todd Licklider, they were all over Matt. They were all over Zach Howard, or Zach Hahn from Newcastle. Butler was. Other programs went out of their way to build relationships with guys on that AAU team, and Indiana was nowhere to be found. And that I just didn't get. And that's why Butler goes to 2 national championship games. They don't do that without Matt Howard. And Brad Stevens got that. And what's Indiana do? Indiana goes out and gets, Jermichael Ellis or whoever the hell, and the fat kid from Chicago, and guys who just could not play, number one. And number two, were not, DeAndre Thomas, that was the big kid from Chicago, just not good people. Not only couldn't they play basketball at a high level, they weren't great people. And so you had Indiana regress, especially within the state, to the point where kids didn't want to go there. How about this? Mike Davis is at the Lawrence North Gym watching Greg Oden. And Mike Conley Sr. walks up to Mike Davis and says, "Hey, Coach, just wanted to point out that my son is right there." And this is Mike Conley, who's made, I don't know what, $250 million playing in the NBA. And Mike Davis looked at Mike Conley Sr. and said, "I'm watching the kid I'm interested in." And then sent a letter to Mike Conley, but it was addressed to Mike, but the letter was actually to a different recruit. So, and that's Mike Conley. Yeah. If you're not dotting I's and crossing T's at that level, like, what the hell are you doing? And also, that is what Indiana became.
Real quick, it wasn't Michael Mincer, because Mincer was the one that upset IU twice, late 90s, early 2000s. It was Colt Ryan, who went to Evansville. He was the kid that was from Batesville. Yeah, and that's a kid that should have been recruited at IU, too. I just figured I'd get that in before people start tweeting to me and calling me names. But I did have the kid went from Batesville to Evansville, but it was Colt Ryan and not the Batesville to Indiana State. And I still don't know why Bob Knight didn't go after Michael Mincer either.
There were a few people, especially late with Knight in the state of Indiana,
where
recruiting just got weird here. Yeah. And you wound up with guys, and nothing against, guys like Charlie Miller or Andre Patterson, or those guys, or Richard Mandeville, who was a little bit earlier, I think. Haston wound up being a terrific player. He was from Tennessee. But you were really kind of gathering disparate parts from other areas of the country and kind of seeded Indiana to others, although at that time Indiana was down a little bit. You look at the Mr. Basketballs and you're like, who the hell were these guys?
Michael Mincer made him pay for it every time he played against IU, because they beat IU down in Terre Haute, and then they came up here and they beat IU in Bloomington. And if I remember right, he had pretty big games in both of those games.
And I remember the Heineman kid from Connorsville who went to Wisconsin, and Indiana didn't get on soon enough, and Heineman made Indiana pay like crazy too.
Yeah, and it looks like that 82 championship game where they beat Anderson by a point, I don't know why you wouldn't have been going after him, because that kid was a really good player. Wasn't there 2 Heinemans on that team?
Yes.
And his brother?
Yep. And then you had a kid like Skiles,
Yeah.
same era, 82, 83, where he beat Cathedral.
Well, no, Connorsville won it all in 83. Plymouth won it in 82.
And that was the Skiles team that beat Cathedral, coached by the great Tom O'Brien. And man, oh man, Scott Skiles, a crazy level competitor. Scott Skiles, how about this? I watch on TV, Indiana plays against Michigan State and Scott Skiles. I watch in the dorm while I'm living in Indiana, and then we go to a party. We go to a dorm party, and it could not have started 3 hours after that game ended at East Lansing. And Scott Skiles was in that party. I have no idea to this day how he got to the party from East Lansing 3 hours after the end of that game. He must have flown. Maybe they stowed him away on the team plane. I don't know how he got there, but there he was.
I always wanted to know why Knight didn't recruit him. It baffled me, because I would think, I mean, maybe he wouldn't have fit well with Steve Alford. I don't know.
The assistant coach for Cathedral at the time, when Skiles was a senior, is a friend of mine, and he wound up coaching Alan Henderson at Brebeuf, and also he was a head coach at Lawrence Central for a good long time, a guy named Mike Miller, and he said he was on the bench for Cathedral early in that game, and that was a really good Cathedral team with Scott
Barlow?
Hicks and Kenny Barlow.
Yeah.
So they were really good, and Skiles walked up to a guy on the floor, grabbed his jersey, and said, "Hey, I can't have that shit." And the kid goes, "Okay, all right." And the kid was so accommodating to Skiles and accepted him as a leader so completely in that moment that Mike was like, we were doomed. There was no way that if there – and I'll give you another great example of a kid like that, and I wish somebody in Indiana had recruited him as a scholarship kid. He wound up going to Butler for a year as a walk-on. But Mike Volovic at Carmel – was that kind of gritty kid and beat Cathedral in the state championship a few years ago, too. You need guys like that. And Indiana has been lacking guys like that for a really long time. A guy who's going to get in somebody's grill and be a pain in the ass and lead that team through tough times toward greater toughness.
Yeah, because Gary Roosevelt had a better team. But
yeah.
And the other guy, they weren't a one-man team. They had, I think Phil Wendell was on that team, too. He was a solid player. I think he averaged like 15, 20 points a game. And the other reason I remember that is I wrote an article on the Grilling Truth on the Legends of Hoosier Hysteria thing that I did. And it was about Scott Skiles. And the title of the article is "The Night a Fat White Kid Became an Indiana Legend."
He was a miracle to watch play basketball, and he had a terrific NBA career and set the all-time record for assists in a game. And Indiana, and he's still, I think he lives in Bloomington. He's got a house on Lake Monroe. And but Indiana, when they look for coaches, they never look towards Scott ever, and I don't understand that either.
Yeah, I don't either, because I think he would be the perfect guy for that. But I think the head coach on that team was Jack Edison, too, who got inducted into the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. But, yeah, I mean, I think they were even underdogs in the regional and the semi-state and just kept winning.
Those, single-class basketball was terrific. And I wish it was still there. I wish we still had single-class basketball, because to see the upsets periodically was just magical. But to the original point that the guy made, there's been no diminution in the quality of basketball in the state of Indiana because it's gone to 4 classes.
Yeah. And the other thing about the 82 game, which I know made a lot of people from Gary Roosevelt mad, was in the 82 championship game, Plymouth had a free throw advantage, if I remember, of something like 40-15 or 38-16. So I think the powers that be may wanted Plymouth to win that game pretty bad, too.
Well, every once in a while you get a cockeyed crew. That's basketball.
But all right, we were going to talk about Princeton because that's the next game, but I don't really think much needs to be said unless you wanted to repeat their record and who they've lost to.
They're 0-3 with losses to Duquesne and then two other schools that I
remember you
actually
said
off the top of my head.
Lafayette and San Francisco, I think is what you told me.
Let's see. It is, Lafayette, San Francisco. And, they are 223rd in the country, according to KenPom. And they don't really do anything great, as you would guess, being 0-3 against Duquesne, San Francisco, and Lafayette.
Yeah, and Duquesne beat them 94-67. And there's not much to know about Duquesne because, they beat Lamar 66-56. They beat Lipscomb 58-36. So there's a chance Duquesne's really good, but even if they're really good, they won 94-67 against Princeton.
Yeah, this should be another walkover, as should Louisiana Tech and South Dakota State. But then it's going to get interesting with Florida State, Wisconsin, UConn, Nebraska, Notre Dame, and Arkansas in December. Those are going to be interesting games. It's a long season. Don't ding Archie too heavily for this cupcake schedule in November. I really think that it's going to pay dividends down the line.
All right, Louisiana Tech, so they're 2-1, but their one loss was, they lost to Creighton 82-72 at Creighton, so that's not a terrible loss. So they might have something.
Nobody gets excited about going to Omaha to play basketball, I don't think.
No, Creighton's a good team. And Duquesne on Thursday night will play my alma mater, the Indiana State Sycamores.
Nice. I really want the Sycamores to do well. Greg Lansing is such a good guy and a good coach. I really want them to find a way, back to where they're winning 22, 23 games and are kind of if not a force, then at least relevant in the Missouri Valley.
Yeah, the only problem in the Missouri Valley anymore, you almost have to win the conference tournament to get into it because the conference has been dumbed down so much.
When Loyola went to the Final Four, if they hadn't won the conference tournament, they wouldn't have got into the tournament.
Yeah, because I'm an old Xavier fan, so when they used to play in like the old MCC, I remember the one year, I think it was the year they played Kansas in a tournament, and they got to play at a neutral site in Nebraska. I think Xavier that year was like 28-5 or 28-3, and got seeded like 11 or 12 to play Kansas.
Yeah, there you go. It's not fair.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Kent, tell everybody where they can find you, which is everywhere.
Oh, it's Kent Sterling, all the time, at Kent Sterling on Twitter. Friend me at Facebook at Kent Sterling, or just follow me. I'm almost full on friends, although you can never have too many friends, can you? And then at KentSterling.com, wrote a thing today about what happened at Southport, where Southport is not going to be eligible in the sectional or in the state tournament in 2020 because the coach paid for a kid's tuition and the kid is on the basketball team. So they took away the postseason from the players rather than taking something meaningful away from the coach.
Why wouldn't they just fire the coach?
There you go. I don't understand how the minds of people work. Here's the way I look at it. When I was a camp counselor as a 20-year-old, I worked really hard for the first couple of weeks to try to make sure the kids at the camp had a good time. And a counselor pulled me aside one day and said, "You got this twisted. You got it backwards. The kids are here for us. We're not here for the kids." And every time a decision like this is made by an organization like the NCAA or the IHSAA, I think of that kid pulling me aside and saying, because I really believe that the NCAA and the IHSAA believe that the kids are there for them rather than them being there for the kids.
Yeah, and I'm reading a little bit about it now. And, geez, really? You paid a tuition for a student from Congo?
Yep. 6'6", a freshman. And I don't even know whether he can play. Maybe the coach was being altruistic. I have no idea. His heart may have been in the right place, but the program goes on probation. The coach gets a 2-game rip, and the kid's ineligible for the year, which you can understand. But then they take away the postseason from kids who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, and I think it's tragic.
Well, they suspended a coach for the first 2 games of the year.
Yep.
They're put on probation. I don't know. That sounds stupid. I just fired a coach.
Well, and even if all the other stuff sticks, don't take away the sectional. from these seniors, they're never going to be able to play again. This is their last year of organized basketball, and you pull the rug out from under them in the state tournament. Toward what end? Like, who gets penalized for that other than the kids? Well, the coach is going to be able to coach sectionals, for the rest of his life. The school's going to be in sectionals. This kid's going to be able to play in 3 of them, but the seniors, they're never going to get a chance to play in another.
All right. I want to bring up to everybody, the show will be posted later tonight. But in the meantime, because we'll post this by the time you hear this show, unless you're listening to it live, go to thegruelingtruth.com, because I haven't listened to it yet, but when you shared it this morning, I got very interested, and that is an interview you got to do with the Hickory Huskers from the movie Hoosiers.
Yeah, 3 years ago today. They were all in town for the 30th anniversary, and I was over at Henkel, and I grabbed all of them, and we went into a room, and they just told stories for a good long time, and I cannot be happier than I was in that moment. And for all of, like, hosting a radio show, there's good and there's challenging to it, but those are the days where you wouldn't want to do anything else for a living.
Oh, yeah. I know what that is. It's like, when me and John Raspani on the boxing show are talking to George Foreman for an hour.
I mean, right.
How cool is that?
Yeah, nothing cooler.
All right, Kent, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Let's just plan on being back here next Monday, because I will be in Panama City for the week coaching football. So
have fun.
All right. So let's say next Monday at 3 o'clock, Kent?
Sure. Perfect.
All right, so join us then, and we'll talk about Indiana, and which should be a 5-0 record, and then previewing Monday night's game. So make sure you check us out then. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find the grueling, or wherever you find podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Kent Sterling, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.